Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. Lamed and Aleph. We're talking about whether the shechita is mitchila v'yad sof, continuously, or it's only officially a shechita at the end. We'll see what practical difference it is, and in the process, we'll have some very interesting discussion. Masif Rav Idi Baravin. Rav Idi Baravin asked the following question: Uvemoed lishmo pater. The Mishnah tells us in Psachim, lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi, that you can't slaughter the korban when you have chametz in your possession, and if you do, you're chayiv malchus. What korban are we talking about? Any korban on Pesach, any valid korban on Pesach that you shecht. Again, Pashup Shad is talking about the korban Pesach on Erev Pesach. So on Erev Pesach, when you shecht the korban Pesach, you can't have any chametz in your possession. And any other korban throughout the week of Pesach, throughout Chol HaMoed, let's say, or Yantiv, any korban that you shecht and you happen to have chametz in your possession, besides for the isser of having chametz in your possession on Pesach, there's a separate isser of lashes for eating, for having lo tishchal al chametz dam zivchi, for shechting something, a kosher korban. But it's only if it's a valid korban. If it's not a valid korban, then you're not going to be chayav for this isser. So the Gemara says, "Uvemoed lishmo pater," quoting the Mishnah, if you shecht the korban Pesach during the moed, lishmo, for a korban Pesach, pater, you're pater from malchus. Why? Because the proper time for slaughtering the korban Pesach is when? It's on Erev Pesach. So if during the Pesach, and again the Gemara there explains that Rabbi Shimon speaking of a case where you lost the korban Pesach, and you replaced it, and then you found the original. So now you go ahead and you slaughter the original korban Pesach on Chol HaMoed. Well, you're not accomplishing anything because you can't bring the korban Pesach during Chol HaMoed. So it's keilu, you didn't shecht a real korban. If you're not shechting a real korban, even though you shouldn't have had chametz in your possession, again, this isser of shechting a korban while you have chametz is only an isser that's going to apply if the shechita is a good shechita. But if you're shechting a korban Pesach during Chol HaMoed as a korban Pesach, obviously it's not the right time, and it's not going to be a good shechita. But says the Gemara, shelo lishmo chayav. But if you shecht it not for lishmo of a korban Pesach, what could you shecht it for if it's not lishmo of a korban Pesach? What can you shecht it for? As a shlamim. If you shecht it as a shlamim, so then lamaisi you're going to be chayav, because again, a regular shlamim will be a good korban. You shecht the Pesach, which was originally set aside for Pesach, you shecht it as a shlamim. It's a good shlamim, and we said this isser of having chametz in your possession when you shecht a korban is not just to the korban Pesach, it's during a shlamim as well, and therefore lamaisi you'll be chayav malchus. V'havina, we asked the following question: Taima d'shelo lishmo. What does this imply? This implies that, and this is a side point, but we have to speak about this. This implies that if I specifically have l'shem yichud kucha brichud shchinte lo lishma korban Pesach, then what happens? Then it becomes a shlamim. But what would happen if I just slaughter this korban, which was originally a korban Pesach? Now it's Chol HaMoed. I lost it, I found it. Now I just shechted stam without any intentions. I don't have intentions for a korban Pesach. I don't have intentions for a shlamim. What does that imply? Hastama pater. But that implies that if I shechted just stam, a korban Pesach, not in its right time stam, it's not going to work as any korban, even as a shlamim, and therefore I'll be pater. Because if it worked as a shlamim, what's the problem with that? Well, until now we've always assumed that when you bring a korban Pesach not at its right time, it counts as a shlamim. Now it sounds like a korban Pesach not at its right time counts as a shlamim only when you specifically have intention to bring it as a shlamim. Hastama pater, v'amai pater. Pesach b'shar yimos hashana shlamim hu. Shmami, no, what do we learn? Pesach b'shar yimos hashana b'aya akira. You clearly see that everything that we thought until now, for 6 years, is not true in the beginning of Shas. What did we think? We always thought you bring a korban Pesach during the year, and it's not the right time, it automatically becomes a shlamim. Says no, you have to designate it in your mind as a shlamim. And if you don't, a Pesach by definition will not become a shlamim. It needs akira. You need to uproot it from its status as a korban Pesach on any day besides for the 14th day of Nisan. So the Chabura of Talmidei Chachamim said, no, that's not true. They said that in general, it's not connected. In general, if you shecht a korban Pesach, what? Without intention, it's going to be a shlamim. And therefore, in this case, theoretically, forget about the case where you lost it and this and that, but let's just say a regular case where you shecht a korban Pesach, shelo lishma, you set it aside for the 14th, you didn't use it, you shecht it on Chol HaMoed, it counts as a shlamim. Therefore, if you have chametz in your possession, you get lashes. What's the case here? Why specifically in this case? What's the Mishnah talking about? When it says it has to be lishma, in a very special case. It's not that they lost a korban. If they lost a korban and then they find it, then they shecht it on Pesach, stam, it's going to be a shlamim and they're going to be chayav malkus. Why in this case are they not chayav malkus? Why specifically in this case does it have to be that it's only if they shecht it as lishma of a shlamim it's going to work? What's pshat? It's a different case. The case is that they were tamei meis, de nidchin lepesach sheni. So they pushed off their korban Pesach sheni. The stama lishmokai. The stam is that it's lishma of a korban pesach. V'hai hu debay akira. Ha'acher lo bay akira. That means in general, if I have a korban pesach, I shecht on the 14th day of Nisan. If I don't shecht on the 14th day of Nisan, I shecht it any other day of the year, 200, whatever, 365, 348 years, it's a shlamim. Except in this specific case. Because this case, I had it on Erev Pesach, and I'm tamei meis. So I specifically have in mind, me and the chabur, whoever's tamei meis, we are setting this aside, because usually a korban pesach after Erev Pesach is done. There's nothing to do with it. That's why it becomes a shlamim, because by next year you can't use it anymore, and it's worth it throughout the year. So it automatically becomes a shlamim. But this is an exception where it's being pushed off, and it still has a purpose of a Pesach. So it's being pushed off, and we're saying that for the next 30 days, this is the only time you could ever do it. For the next 30 days, we're extending this to be a korban pesach. So now, if I use it between now and those 30 days, as opposed to every other Pesach, every other Pesach offering, which by definition, once Pesach, once the 14th of Nisan passes, it automatically becomes a shlamim. This specific one, which is set aside specifically for Pesach Sheni, that one, in order to now say it's going to become a shlamim, I have to have an akira. And in our case in the Mishnah, it says that if I shecht it stam, what am I shechting? I'm shechting a korban pesach at the wrong time. Therefore, it's not going to count as a shlamim, and I'm not going to be chayav if I do it on Pesach. But any other korban in general, if I lose it and I find it on Pesach and I shecht it, it's a shlamim, and I'm chayav if I have chametz. But this specific case is an exception because it's set aside as a korban pesach for 1 month. Therefore, unless I go ahead and I uproot it during these next 30 days, if I don't uproot it, then l'maisa it's a korban pesach, and if I shecht it now, it's a korban pesach shelo lishma. It's a korban pesach shelo bizmano, and therefore it will not count as a shlamim. But in general, everything we had until now, the last 6 years, Baruch Hashem, is not wrong. And a korban pesach that you shecht shelo lishma, or a korban pesach that you shecht not on Pesach, is going to be a shlamim.
Day 31 is going to be a shlamim.
Day number 31.
Every 2 months.
Correct. So the Gemara says now, well, okay, what does that have to do? It's a very nice Gemara. It's interesting, but what does that have to do with anything that we're talking about? So, if you say that shchita is what? From the beginning to the end, you look at the entire process as being the shchita. If solei mitchila shchita, so then what happens? As soon as you go ahead and you shecht this korban, so what happens? Again, this korban needs to be specifically uprooted. This specific korban that's set aside, right? So if you slaughter it on Pesach, as soon as you slaughter it, what happens? You're slaughtering a Pesach korban shelo bizmano. He invalidates what? Since, again, the entire thing is considered to be shchita. So even the beginning of the shchita is considered to be what? The beginning of the shchita is considered to be a real shchita. The entire process is shchita. Therefore, as soon as you start the shchita, what are you shechting? You're shechting a korban pesach shelo bizmano. Right. Because this is set aside, it's still a korban pesach. It's not becoming a shlamim. It's a korban pesach shelo bizmano, which you now shechted. And what happens? Lamai said it's not going to count, and therefore you're not going to get malchus. That's according to the other opinion. The problem is Levi. Why? Because according to Levi, when you say that shchita is not the entire process. Shchita is the end of the process. That's shchita. So that's Gemara. Kevan deshacha beporta. So now, according basically, like we say many times, according to the first opinion, you don't actually freeze frame. You can't freeze frame anything. It's all part of one shchita. Therefore, this shchita is a korban pesach that's shelo bizmano. It's a korban pesach again because l'maisa it's set aside for the next 30 days. It's shelo bizmano. You don't get malchus if you have chametz in your possession when you shecht it on chol hamoed. But according to Levi, so the shchita doesn't happen till the end, quote unquote, the halachic shchita. Therefore, you can freeze frame this act of what you're doing in the middle of the process. So think about what happens now. You have this korban pesach, which is set aside as a korban pesach. We go ahead and we start the incision. You start to cut. What happens if I freeze frame it after cutting half the trachea? Let's say I cut half the trachea and then I freeze frame it. What happens at that point? Well, according to the first opinion, you already shechted, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you already shechted what? You already shechted a korban pesach shelo bizmano, because we care about the entire process. You shechted it shelo bizmano and you're done and you're pater. If you freeze frame it, though, according to the second opinion now, what happens when you shechted half the trachea? It's no longer fit for a korban pesach. It's not that you shechted a korban pesach shelo bizmano. You still have a whole animal here. You haven't done the shechita yet. But now you have an animal that has half a trachea. It's going to die very shortly. It's not fit for a Korban Pesach. What happens now? So what happens to that animal? It's no longer set aside for 30 days from now because it's not fit right now for a Korban Pesach. Now it becomes a shlamim. Keep the camera rolling. You finish the shechita. You just shechted a shlamim. This one, according to the first opinion, never becomes a shlamim because at the same time that you're making it into a shlamim, you're finishing the shechita of a Korban Pesach shelo bismano. But this one, where the shechita, quote unquote, doesn't happen, as he says, ein el shechita ela basof, you don't consider the shechita happening until the end. When you start the cut, you freeze it right here halfway or a quarter of the way, you now have an animal that's not going to make it till Pesach Sheni. Therefore, if you freeze it right there, it switches from being a Korban Pesach to being a shlamim. When you do the shechita at the end, you just did shechita on a shlamim, and you should get malchus for doing that with chametz in your possession on Pesach.
Wow.
Easy Gemara, don't worry. Says the Gemara, idchile mi Pesach. Once you slaughter, let's say, half the trachea or a quarter of it, it's no longer fit from being Pesach. Now, he doesn't explain what that means, but idchile mi Pesach, seemingly what? It's going to make it, right? It's not an act of cutting. It's not an act of shechita.
Why can't you say it's no longer fit to be a shlamim either?
It is, because it is fit to be a shlamim.
Oh, because it will make it till the cut.
It'll make it till 1 second from now.
Right.
It'll make it till the end of the cut. It'll make it 5 minutes. It'll make it 10 minutes. Again, it's not exactly the Rashi. He's not explaining it, but that's the way that I understand it. It's going to make it. You can shecht it as a shlamim right now. Can't necessarily set it aside as a korban pesach, but you can shecht it as a shlamim right now.
Otherwise, you have the problem with every shechita.
Otherwise, you have a problem with every shechita. Correct. Idach ki kashachit. But now when you cut the rest of the pite, shlamim kashachit. You're doing a shlamim, and therefore, l'maisa, you should be chayav. The fact that it says that you're not chayav malchus, shows that we don't hold like Rebbe Levi, that we don't hold like Levi the Zakin. We hold like Rabbi Yochanan. We don't hold like Levi the Zakin, and we hold that shchita is not ela basof, it's shchita mitchila ve'atsof. Amalei Abaye, no. You could still hold like Levi. Why? Because even though if I freeze frame it, it's no longer fit to be a korban pesach. Midemei pesach mi idche. It's not set aside from be able to be the value of a pesach, to be able to be redeemed. Why? Because at the end of the day, the halacha is that if you have a psulei mikdashim, if you have a consecrated animal that gets a blemish, what happens? You redeem it for money, and then you buy a replacement. Now, when this pipe originally is cut and you freeze frame it, even though it's not going to make it till Pesach, you can still theoretically, even though you're not going to, you can still theoretically sell the animal at that time. So even though Lamaisi, you're telling me it's no longer a Pesach alt being able to make it to Pesach Sheni, it still has a redemption value at this moment. If it still has a redemption value at this moment, it doesn't leave the parsha of being a Korban Pesach. Therefore, even within Levi, it's still a Korban Pesach Shelo Bizmano, as opposed to turning into a Shlamim. That's what the Gemara says. And if you say, well, what are you talking about? In order to be able to be redeemed, a psulei mukdashin needs to be evaluated. You have to be able to stand it. You have to be able to appraise it and evaluate. And this, obviously, if it's in the midst of being cut, is not going to be able to stand on its feet. V'atanan, the Gemara says, no, shachad b'shnayim eroshnayim, v'adayin hi mifarkeset. Even if an animal is still jerking after it was already cut, harehi kechayi l'chol dorah. Theoretically, again, you're not going to do this, because it's not going to happen. You're not going to have to run to the marketplace in time. It's going to take 3 seconds. But theoretically, at that moment, if there was a guy standing right next to you, you can go ahead and you can redeem that Korban Pesach or that Pesach sacrifice or any sacrifice even before it drops, even while it's in the process of dying. So if in the process of dying, even though it's no longer quote-unquote a Korban Pesach, not fit to be brought in a month from now, it could still be redeemed. Since it could still be redeemed, one can argue that it's still in the parsha of Korban Pesach, even according to Levi, and therefore Lemaisa never switches over to a Shlamim even within him, and therefore you will not be liable. Again, very, okay, this is the easy Gemara. Next Gemara, a little bit harder. Amar v'yudam Rav. Now we're going to talk about making more than one cut in an animal. And there's different pshatim exactly how to learn it. We're going to learn Rashi as learned by Tosfos. Amar v'yudam Rav. Hashoche b'shnayim u'shlosha mekomot. So what do we usually do? We usually cut an animal in one spot. Forget about 1 or 2 pipes. Let's just say 1 pipe for now. In one spot. You have to cut 2 for an animal. Let's just say you're dealing with a bird, whatever. So you cut 1 pipe in 1 spot. You have to cut a rove. B'di'evet, and you're fine. You cut the whole thing. You cut a rove. Hashoche b'shnayim u'shlosha mekomot. Rav says if you cut in 2 or 3 places, shchita sokshera. Because what's the big deal? You cut 2 or 3 places, who cares? You cut, as long as you have 1 that's a rove, you're good to go. There's different opinions. Maybe you're cutting each, and they're adding up to a rove. But let's just assume that you're cutting. Let's just see a second. We're going to call it shchita mifaras, which means, and wide open, as he explains, easily discernible incision. You need to have a discernible incision that you could see veleka, and there is none. Rashi explains again based on Tosfos. What's the question here? What's happening?
You're cutting.
I'm going to tell you 1 second. What's happening, and then we'll understand what Shmuel holds and what Rav holds. What's happening here is you're taking a knife, and again, hard to understand, but because we don't see the picture, but you're cutting across the animal, right? So if you cut like this and you cut both of the pipes, fine. Here, imagine you have one pipe. You're cutting the top part of the pipe a little bit. You're cutting the middle of the pipe a rove, because if you cut it more than a rove, then even Shmuel is going to agree you did what you had to do. You cut it a rove, and then the bottom of the pipe a little bit as well. What happens there? So according to Rav, what's the problem? You cut the middle part a rove, and you're good to go.
Right.
According to Shmuel, there's a little bit of a technical problem here. Because the top part and the bottom part, yes, the middle part's a rove. But the fact that you cut the top and the bottom, what happens? The top, which is cut, is going to push down. The bottom that's cut might push up. When the bottom pushes down and the top pushes, when the top pushes down and the bottom pushes up, what happens to the cut in the middle?
Closes.
It's no longer discernible. That's what he means. It's not a shchita mifaras. You can no longer easily see it. So he's talking about technically, of course, you cut a rove in the middle. And of course I agree, Shmuel says that if you cut a rove, everybody agrees if you cut a rove of a pipe, you're good to go. But in this specific case where you made 3 cuts, let's say, just for argument's sake, you cut a little bit, a rove, and a little bit, Rav says, okay, of course that's good. You cut the rove in the middle. Shmuel says not so simple, because that cut is not discernible, because if you look at it, you might not be able to see the middle cut, because again, when the top is cut and the bottom is cut a little bit, they're going to be pushing, pressure is going to be pushing the middle cut, and it's going to look like it's back together. Even though we know that rove is cut, it's not going to be discernible, and therefore it's going to be possible. So it's a very specific case where Shmuel is saying that 2 or 3 cuts. Again, other Mefarshim explain is that you're doing 3 little cuts and they're adding up to a rove, and Rav says it's okay to add up, and Shmuel says it's not. But according to the way that this is understanding Shmuel's, again, it's always easier to have the machlokes in a much more technical case. We don't like mitzias machlokeses, but we also don't like machlokeses. So if we could establish a machlokes as being a very specific case where you cut a little bit, cut rove, and cut a little bit, it's much better than saying, well, they argue about all cases where you add up 3 little cuts to a rove or not. So that's what Shmuel says.
Once you do rove in the proper way, then isn't it called, does it matter if it's not discernible afterwards? It's called.
So it's an interesting question. It could be that you made the 2 little cuts first and then you made the middle cut.
Okay, well, it have to be, yeah.
Right? Because according to you, if you made the little cut on top and then you made the middle cut, then you're done.
But that's not Rashi.
But if you do, well, it could be Rashi. Maybe he just says 2 or 3 cuts. So it could be that you push. Rashi doesn't say anything. That's the problem. Rashi says Rashi's very shechatach kan v'chazar v'hitchil lishcho lamata olamala. So that sounds like he's making the middle cut first. But it's a little bit hard to understand. Again, unless you say that it's not really done, unless you say that you did it all within one motion. That means if you cut the middle one, you're done.
Yeah.
But now, maybe Shmuel's saying after the fact, you can ruin it if it's not discernible anymore. I don't know, unclear. But the easiest way to understand is you make the little cut, and then the big cut in the middle. Lamais at that point, the middle cut's not discernible. Says in Gemara, V'yaf Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish shavar ba'inan shchita mifaras. Even Reish Lakish holds you need this shchita mifaras. Amar Reish Lakish minayin l'shchita she mifaras. How do you know that an incision needs to be mifaras? And Emar chet shachut l'shona mirma daber. So you see that it says the word shachut, which is the shecht, and it compares it to an arrow. An arrow, as we know, an arrow cuts only in one place. For those that know, that an arrow cuts only one place when you shoot it at somebody, so too, the shechting needs to be specifically in one place. Ma'aseh Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says something interesting. We're going to clarify Shmuel. Shmuel, who says it has to be discernible, holds something else as well. Beis ochnin besakin v'shochtin. If 2 people are holding a knife and they slaughter, now that's the pasha, the havamina is that you're dealing with 2 people, each holding their own knife. So you're dealing with basically 2 cuts in the pipe of the animal, each one making their own cut. Even if one cuts on top and one cuts on the bottom, it's kosher. Seems to be hard to understand. Why is 2 cuts good? He said that 2 cuts or 3 cuts should not be good. There's no discernible incision over here. So it's interesting. It sounds like over here, what are we doing? We're dealing with 1 knife. The Gemara seems to be understanding that according to Shmuel, it's not only a din that you have that the top flap and the bottom flap are pushing the middle one. That's only one example of being discernible. Another example of being discernible is that if you have 2 separate cuts, from two separate people, that's also not discernible because you now know which one is the kosher shechita and which one's not, even if they're both rov. So it says in Gemara, it can't be that two people are holding two different knives because Shmuel would say that that's a problem. So where does Shmuel say that it's okay? Again, Rav would say that's okay even two people holding two knives. He doesn't have a problem with 5 cuts as long as one of them is rov. But Shmuel would learn that this case of Beis Ochazin is two people holding one knife together. So what does it mean? That's fine. So two people holding one knife together, it's not a problem. They cut one thing. But what does it mean? Echad lamala ve'echad lamata. So what does echad lamala ve'echad lamata mean? It seems to be saying that it was on an angle, like this. You cut the pipe like that. So if it's on an angle, you have a high top part and a bottom part. But it's only talking about Shmuel, one knife with two people, because if it was two knives, in Achanami, he would say aser.
But if you're doing anything, like you're going to be outside of the Makom Shechita?
No, so again, it sounds like you're not doing it like that. You're doing it on it. Right? We know there's a lot of room there's a lot of room on the corner to be able to cut. So you cut it on an angle. It doesn't be a sharp angle. There's only one problem. This Mishnah, it says, Beis Ochsin Besakin V'Shochtin. Two people, whatever this means, either two holding one knife or two holding two knives. A Tana comes on that Mishnah. Forget about Shmuel for a second. A Tana comes on that Mishnah and says that Mishnah is Ein Choshin Shema Yitrafu Zelzeh. The reason that Mishnah with two people, whatever the case is going to be kosher, is because we're not choshesh that each one is going to render it a treifa. What does that mean? We're not choshesh that each one is not going to be careful with their cut because they're going to say what? I don't have to be so careful with my cut because the other guy is going to take care of whatever needs to get done. Well, how does that work? That only makes sense if what? If you explain the Mishnah as being two people each holding their own knife. Right. If you explain the Mishnah saying two people each holding their own knife, why? We're not choshesh that each one is going to cut only a little bit and just rely on the other guy. But if you explain that the Mishnah is what? Two people holding one knife, and it's kosher, what does that mean? We're not choshesh that both people are going to rely on the other guy. What do you mean both people are relying on the other guy? Both people are cutting the knife together. Says the Gemara, two knives and two people, and then you're saying it's kosher, and it's not like Shmuel, because he would hold that two knives and two people would not be kosher. They're each somech on the other one. He's going to make the real shchita, and we don't have this chashash that each one's going to rely on the other one and not going to do a rov. What should it say? Shema Yidris should have said it's kosher when two people are holding the same knife. We're not worried that even though two of them are holding it, we're not worried that they're going to do drisa, that they're going to push down, that they're going to decapitate it. We hold that even when two people are holding it, they can actually do a nice motion. But it doesn't say that. It says Shema Yitrafu. It doesn't say Shema Yidrasu. So it sounds like the case is that two people are holding two different knives as opposed to two people holding one knife. Amalei Rabbi Avin, Tani, Ein Choshin, you're right. Just read it. Ein Choshin Shema Yidrasu Zelzeh. It's always easy to answer when you can just say, oh yeah, it says different than we actually read. You're right. It says Ein Choshin. We're not Choshesh of Drisa. Therefore you can explain that it's two people holding one knife. Two people holding one knife. It's a case of Drisa. And then according to even Shmuel would agree that it's going to be kosher in that case. He would only say it wouldn't be kosher in the case of two people holding two knives, but that's not the case the Gemara is dealing with. Another kasha on Shmuel. Good? Any questions?
Yeah, we did hear before that two people doing shechita is not good. Was that just according to Rav? Shmuel. Not everybody holds that two people doing one shechita is not good.
Were they talking about? I don't remember, but were they talking about two people? Were they talking about two people doing shechita with the same knife at the same time, or back to back? Because if you're saying two people doing shechita together, then it would be fine, seemingly. Well, you could hold that it's not fine if you're makbid on drisa, if you're worried about drisa. But over here it says we're not makbid on that.
But two people doing shechita at the same time with two knives, that would not be.
Two shechita doing two knives would be fine according to Rav.
Not Shmuel.
Would not be fine according to Shmuel, because it's not a discernible shechita. Masir Rabbi Avin asked a question on Shmuel again, who says that two different places will be a problem. Shachar at aveshet lamata v'erakana lamala, or at aveshet lamala v'erakana lamata. You cut one of them towards the head and one of them closer to the body. Shchita sok shera. Amai v'aleka shchita mifaras. Understand, if you're cutting the esophagus and the trachea in two different spots on the body, then when you look at it, it's not discernible. Because again, now the Gemara is assuming that when Shmuel says it needs to be discernible, it needs to be mifaras, not only can't you have the top and the bottom pushing the middle one together, when you look at it, they need to be on the same horizontal plane. It needs to be a nice glatt cut. It can't be that the esophagus is cut here and the trachea is cut here and you got to start searching for it. Says the Gemara, "Hu motzelav hu mefarik la b'shchita asuya b'kolmos." No, again, it doesn't mean, you're right. Shmuel would hold that just like you can't have two people, just like you can't cut it three different places and you can't close up because it's not discernible, you also can't cut the trachea here and the esophagus here. Again, we're dealing with an animal. You can't cut the trachea here and the esophagus here. What's it talking about? One lamala, one lamata, the same thing. You cut them on an angle. You're cutting it on an angle, but when you look at it, you can clearly see the cut on an angle because they're pretty much close to each other. There was an ox that was cut in 2 or 3 places, and Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Mata said, "This is delicious meat." He took the best meat over there. We see that according to you, you don't hold the Shmuel. You clearly hold that you can even have 2 people cutting with 2 different knives. And Lamaisa, again, he doesn't paskin like Shmuel. Doesn't mean that we don't paskin like Shmuel, but he clearly doesn't paskin like Shmuel. Okay, we're done with that. That was the easy Gemara. Now into the harder Gemara. Says the Gemara, Amar v'Yehuda Amar Rav. We're going to deal with chalada. We said that chalada is burrowing. We said drisa is when you decapitate, when you push down. Another isser, one of the 5 issurim, is chalada. Now, until now, we assumed, well, what's chalada? The way that we explained is you have the trachea here and the esophagus here. So we said in general, you just sort of cut both at the same time. We said it's usher to stick the knife between the 2 and then sort of cut one and then the other. You have to go across like this. You can't stick the knife in between the 2. You can't poke in between and then do a cut. What we're going to see here also is that it's also usher to go from behind.